September the 17th, 2004. I am with Charlie Fitz today. He's with the C66th. I appreciate you letting me talk with you today. We're going to talk about your World War II experiences, but you were a prisoner of war, and we have previous tapes that talks more generally about your service. Let's first start the first action that you remember. Let's kind of work into this POW experience.
Are you asking about our action, the division's actions?
Or the
Well,
66th, the first
our
action that you
action, I
remember.
believe, the first day we were in combat was early December of 1944. We were supposed to be an armored infantry battalion, but we acted more like the foot infantry. We did not move in our mechanized vehicles to start with. We walked a lot through the mud. I don't remember dates. I have a book at home where I have recorded a lot of things, but we would move to the front line. Our action was, our first action was in the vicinity of Luneville, which is in the Alsace-Lorraine province of France. And we would move on the front for 3 or 4 days and either accomplish our objective or give up on it and move back or move to another area. This is the way everything in the Army operated. I think the longest we were on the front on the actual front lines any time before I was captured, I believe, was 5 days. And we would be advancing, hopefully taking our objectives and moving to the next one. And then we would be replaced by another unit, picking up where we left off and keeping on going. I wish I knew how many days we were on the front. I do not know. 2 significant things. We were with the 7th Army originally, and my recollection, General Patch was the commanding general of the 7th Army, and we were transferred to the 3rd Army. General Patton was the commanding general. And we had been on the line 3 or 4 days, and about the 16th or 17th of December, we were relieved by the 4th Armored Division. And the 4th Armored Division was the one that General Patton said that he could take to Bastogne in 3 days. And he moved the entire 4th Armored Division to Bastogne. And it was the force that ultimately relieved the 101st and the units that were Bastogne and beat the Germans back. Then 2 days before Christmas of 1944, we went to the front. And we were on the front Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day of 1944. And there was little action. I think maybe the Germans will recognize it. It was the Christmas season and the birth of our Savior. There's little firing done. We had to be careful of each other, of course, but there was not much firing. But in the middle of the day, we began to hear vehicles rumbling behind us. And quite naturally, we thought they were Germans coming in from behind, that had infiltrated back and were coming in from our rear. Well, all the rumbling stopped about a half a mile from us, and they sent word up that our mess sergeant, who was a big Italian, wonderful person, must have weighed 300 pounds. Naturally, his name was Tiny. His name was Nilo Lazari, but he was called Tiny. He was our mess sergeant. And he had cooked a hot Christmas meal and brought it to the front line to us. That, of course, we'd eaten rations, nothing but rations, and that day we had the same Christmas dinner you had. We had turkey, dressing, English peas. I don't know. It was everything you ought to have, and they had banana pudding for dessert. And for that action, it was funny because we would have to go back a few at a time. There always had to be people on the front manning the guns, the sentry posts, and we go back a few at a time, and we'd have to walk that half mile and come back after we'd eaten. And the kitchen crew was scared to death to be that close to the front. They'd never been to the front before. But as a result of that wonderful gesture, Tiny was awarded the Bronze Star. All right, now I'll stop a minute and you tell me what to do.
Okay. Okay. So you had Christmas. Were you in the Stein Forest? Were you were you in Herlesheim when you were?
No.
Where did you get captured? Get me up to where you were captured.
I forget the date. It was the 27th, 28th of December. We were relieved and we went to the rest area. And we were issued new types of equipment that had come out. And this was a time when you just sort of took it easy and you had duties to perform, but you were not on the front line. You weren't scared to death you'd be shot at every day.
What was the new equipment that they gave you?
Well, sometimes it would just be a different piece of clothing. I got a pair of snowpacks. If you're familiar with the L.L. Bean boot, it's got the rubber bottom and the leather top. The Army issued some of those. I got a pair of those. We went back to the front for 2 or 3 days right after the first of the year. Then we moved back into a rest area, and that was the town of Niederschäfelsheim. And on the 16th of January, well, on the 15th of January, we were told that we would move out the next morning. And I don't know how far we traveled. I would say 10 miles, but I don't know. But we left Niederschäfelsheim at 3 o'clock in the morning and were going to attack the Steinwall Forest, which was supposed to have been reasonably clear of Germans. And to get to the Steinwall Forest, we had to go some distance, and shucks, we talked about it among ourselves, and all of us were there, but we don't ever agree on how far we walked or whatever. We had a small bridge, maybe 18 inches wide, that we walked across the Zorn River, which was not much wider than this room, but you walked it on it with your rifle and all your equipment. I don't think anybody fell in. I didn't. And then we were to attack about 6 o'clock in the morning before daylight across the AIB, I think was 6 o'clock. And 3 German prisoners were taken. I don't know how to explain this. In combat, you normally advance 3 units at a time. A platoon here, and a platoon in reserve. So if this platoon gets in trouble, the reserve can go there, it could go here. We were essentially in that formation, moving forward through an area that's as flat as this floor. There was no hills, no rises, no ditches, nothing, just flat ground with 8 to 10 inches of snow on top of it. And the 3 prisoners were taken and gave evidence that they wanted to get out of there as quickly as they could. One prisoner, I'm told, I didn't see this, one of the 3 prisoners escaped and got back toward the German lines. Here again, because of that, we think perhaps that he alerted the troops to the force that was moving toward the woods. Well, we did not get to the woods. We got close, but they opened fire, and C Company was just about annihilated. We did not know it at the time. Later on in the day, we found out that all of our officers were killed. Most of our sergeants were killed. Nobody to give us an order. Well, 3 of us that were good friends and close together in the same squad. In the infantry, you never stayed close to where you could touch somebody. You always wanted to stay in contact, but you wanted to stay 15 yards from him if you could, so one shell wouldn't get both of you. And this was part of training. George O'Brien, Paul Rice, and I were right close together. And after the initial burst, when you hit the ground, and several people would get up and run to try to get to the rear, or to the flank, and they were cut down. As soon as they stood up, they were just cut right back down. So after that happened a few minutes, this was all before daylight. I hollered, George and Paul and I realized we were still alive and uninjured. And you just kept quiet. Excuse me, can you stop a minute?
It's okay.
The wounded were crying for help, and a person tried to get up and help one of them. He shot down immediately. So it was the most terrible few hours I ever spent in my life, was having people 75 or 100 yards from you that needed help, and you couldn't go help them unless you got yourself killed. And a lot of them, I guess, died of their wounds without getting any help. But George and I decided we were still alive after it got daylight. We'd just lay there all day. And when it got dark, we could crawl out. Well, we lay there till somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the Germans obviously thought everybody out there was dead, and they came out, started looting bodies. And they saw my snowpacks and rolled me over to take them off, and that's when they realized I wasn't dead. And I don't know why he didn't kill me. I'll never know why. But he didn't. And he didn't even take my snowpack. I had wet my breeches 3 times during the day. And the area of the wetness had frozen. And I had problems getting up. My legs just didn't function properly. And he helped me up, the German helped me up. And they had a pillbox that they had set up as an aid station for their own wounded, but they took us back there. And that was when we stood up and could look and see where we were and what had happened, was the first time we knew of the graciousness of God that left us alive and so many dead. I believe there were 48 dead. My recollection is there were about 18 of us in this group that were captured. And took me back to the aid station pillbox and rubbed my legs with something that I would call horse liniment. But it started the circulation and I could walk. The ranking man in our company was Sergeant Callahan, our platoon sergeant. And he had been hit in the back of the neck and the bullet had come out his chin. But he was up and he was talking with the German officers. We had, I believe we had 3. One of them was a man in the same squad with me at the aid station, and we later learned that they died during the night. They did not make it through the night. Those of us that could were moved across the Rhine River. Here again we argue about how we got across the Rhine River. I know I walked on a pontoon bridge. Some of the others say they were taken by boat. I don't know. And none of us know how far we walked. We think it was in the area of about 4 miles. It was dark then. We were walking in the dark. And we were collected in the houses over in that part of the world, a lot of them that are farm-type homes. The barn is the ground floor of the house, and the living quarters is above the house. And we were in a house like that, but the bottom floor was not a barn. I guess it could have been, but in this house it wasn't. But we were shut in downstairs and taken up one at a time for our first interrogation as prisoners of war. And my story about that is in the other tape that you have of me. I don't know whether you want to repeat it now.
Yeah, I'd like for you to, just for continuity of
I didn't hear
story.
you.
Just for the continuity of your story.
Do it again.
Yes, sir.
I was the 3rd person called up to be interviewed. And there was a German colonel. And as we were taught, I walked in and saluted him. He returned my salute, asked me to sit down, asked me if I wanted a cigarette or a glass of brandy. I wanted both of them, but I told him no. And he talked a minute. I certainly don't have a recording of his conversation, but I think I recall him asking me if I had been injured or if I was hurt, if I needed medical attention, and then asked me to give him the name of my mother. He wanted to write her that I was all right. And I gave him my name, rank, and serial number, which is all I was supposed to have to do. And he pleaded with me, "You're being stupid. All I want to do is tell your mother you're all right." Charles M. Fitz, Jr., PFC 34635552. I answered about 6 questions like that, in that manner. Nothing but my name, rank, and serial number. He stood up and came out from around the desk. He had a pistol, of course. I didn't know whether he was going to shoot me, what he was going to do. But he looked me in the eye and he said, "Fitz, you're crazy." He says, you in the 12th Armored Division, you in C Company of the 66th Armored Infantry, you are the assistant squad leader of the 60 millimeter mortar squad in the 2nd platoon. I don't know where they got that information, unless one of the two people, if that's all there were other prisoners in this area, a few from other divisions, but they would have known anything about me. But somebody must have talked. A PFC that the colonel already knew that much about. Somebody had to talk. I've never understood it. I don't today. Unless whoever that happened to be got some kind of special treatment, which I doubt. We spent the night in this place, and the next morning, I'm going to say by then there were probably 50. There were people from the 106th Division, 106th Infantry Division, that had been taken, and they were integrated with us. And I had 40 or 50 people. I really do not remember, because I wasn't the least damn bit, I'm sorry, interested in counting heads at that time. I was alive, and so was George O'Brien and Bob Howell, and the people that Tom Wood, George Rich, all of us were still alive, and we didn't know why. But for 4 days, we walked, and we walked from wherever this was in the neighborhood of Herlisheim. We crossed where we crossed the river. We walked from there to Stuttgart, which was about 70 miles, something like that. And in Stuttgart, we were put in our first established German prison camp. We were billeted at Stalag 5A, which was outside the town of Stuttgart. We stayed there 10 days or 2 weeks. I have this written down in my book at home. This where we were billeted apparently was a fine horse rink. It was dirt floor, like it ought to be in a horse rink, but it had pretty siding, had marble, ceramic tile and stuff like that. It was all right. And we had a bathroom. No bathing facilities, but we had a bathroom inside. And we were there 10 or 12 days. And during that time, they would interrogate us and talk to us and stuff like that. You still name, rank, and serial number. But there, they separated us from some of our clothing. If you had 2 pair of anything, they took one. I had on 2 pair of long johns. It was freezing cold. Oh, the mercy. And to never get out of it, it was, as I said, I had on 2 pair of long johns. They took one of them. I had on a shirt and 2 sweaters, and they took one of my sweaters. I had 3 pair of socks. In the infantry, your feet are the most important piece of equipment other than your rifle. And I had dry socks. They took my 2 pair of dry socks. You had one of everything, and that was it. Well, after this 10 or 12 days, they told us we were moving and put us on the cattle cars, 60 of us to a cattle car, and there is a narrow gauge railroad there. Cars are smaller than ours. With 60 in a cattle car, you cannot all do anything at one time. You can't all lie down. You can't all sit down. You can stand up. That's the only thing all 60 can do. So we worked out real quick that there would be shifts of people sitting, lying down, standing, and you rotated your shift. These things they're bad, but they're such an integral part of it. We had a hole in the corner of the boxcar. Wood had just rotted away or been broken or something. So that was our latrine. And you're going to just keep yourself as far away from that corner as you could, but it was a necessary piece of equipment.
Charlie, can I get your car keys? Can I get your car keys?
Where are you going?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were locked in there for 2 nights and 3 days, and they never let us out. And we don't know how far we were. I have never measured it on a map. It doesn't make any difference now. But in that cattle car, it was 2 nights and 3 days.
Can you tell me, I'm going to stop you for a second, how did y'all work out the system? Was there a leader, some leaders, or did you just kind of...
Yeah.
How did you decide to
somebody, and you always went by rank. It wasn't one of our people. It wasn't one of the 18 of us that I specifically refer to, because there are 18 of us out of C Company that were captured on the 16th and stayed together throughout. And of the 18, out of the 18 in that group, there's 6 of us that are still alive, and 5 of us are in Abilene here. But the ranking person, whoever that was, we immediately decided we had to agree on something. And whoever this ranking person was stood up and says, all right, we're going to do it this way. And this is what we did. We took shifts, sitting down, and I don't remember how many it was, 15, 20 at a time. And I think we were given numbers. He'd say number 6. And that was time for number 6 to do something. The train was stopped twice, and all of the guards and the train crew would get out and run to the woods. There'd be an airstrike, but the airstrike never hit our train. We had to detour once because the air raid in front of us had blown out some of the track, and they detoured us around that. But we wound up at Fallinbostel, which was Stalag 11B. And it was one of the 5 or 6 renowned stalags in that it was so large. I have a book, if I recall it correctly, there could have been as many as 30,000 prisoners at Stalag 11B. It was absolutely terrible. It was a standard building, wooden, with 5 bunks, floor to ceiling. There were 300 of us in this one room building, and we had 2 stoves, wood-burning stove here and one there, equally spaced maybe, and 3 electric light bulbs, just a cord and a light bulb on it. And that was it. You were assigned a bunk. At Stuttgart, we were issued a blanket, a woolen blanket. Well, you wrap up in your blanket. You had a straw mattress at 11B. And you were behind the barbed wire fence. You had an outdoor latrine. And our area was right next to a British area, area for British PWs. And you could talk through the fence to them, which we did. And some of them had been in prison since Dunkirk. They were captured at Dunkirk. They had been in prison camp longer than the United States had been in the war. Well, they got along fine. The British just, they got the Red Cross parcels. They got things that they were supposed to. They got new uniforms. Of course, we were not issued anything new. About a week after we had gotten to 11B, and you had to tear up a piece of your bunk to have wood to burn in the stove, so you didn't have fires very often. They did not provide any wood. Every morning you fell out and they had a head count to see if somebody had escaped during the night. And as I say, about a week after we had been there, that one morning at the head count, they asked for 100 volunteers for a commando group. The commando group was a work detail. Well, all of us were standing close together, and we looked at each other, and I just told them, I said, I'm going to step forward because I could give anything to get out of this place. And all of us stepped forward, and they had 100 people, including us. And they said, all right, we're going to put you on a train about the middle of the afternoon. And they did, and we took off. We didn't know where we were going. We were on a train all night. And the next morning, they told us we were in Hanover. Hanover's a big city. And they told us that we were going to be billeted in what had been a real fine school. And we were in the gym. And they had the 3 barracks, bunks built up, only 3. They didn't have 5. They did not have mattresses, they just had straw. And that's when George O'Brien and Paul Rice and I decided that if we cuddled up, we'd have 3 blankets. And so we snuggled every night with 3 blankets and survived. Our work project was at the little community or village of Missburg outside of Hanover, where there was a tremendous oil, benzene factory. Benzene is synthetic gasoline, and it was, I guess, invented and perfected for flying their jet airplanes and their rockets. The V-2s, the V-1s, the V-5 rockets, the one that they rained down on London. It had been bombed to the ground, and they were in the process of rebuilding it. Well, it's just like any refinery. They had these huge metal tanks, 500,000 gallons, I don't know, great big things. And they had a 6-foot brick wall built around each one of them, so that only a direct hit could damage it. If a bomb burst 100 yards away from it, it couldn't penetrate the 6-foot brick. But it had blown down a bunch of the brick walls. And our job was to they gave us a little knife type of thing, and we would have chipped mortar off of bricks so they could reuse the bricks when they rebuilt the plant. Well, we were told if we didn't have 600 bricks a day, we would not get our supper ration. I think the highest number I got in one day was 120, and nobody else ever talked about getting 600. And we found out what we were doing. We began to tell anybody that we could tell that we were in violation of the Geneva Convention. We were not supposed to be ordered to do anything that would help the war effort. Well, they imagine how much attention that got from the Germans.
Did they really not feed you? They didn't feed you if you didn't get 600?
Yeah, you got the same piece of bread and a cup of hot water, which was supposed to be soup. Yes, we would get our ration. We never once were restricted from that one piece of bread and that cup of hot water. We had the overseer, was a man do you ever watch golf? Are you familiar with Craig Statler? This man was an old edition of Craig Statler. He looked like a walrus, and we called him the Walrus. That was our name for him, was the Walrus. Well, he was old, and he said very little to us. He was a civilian. We had our guards were military. They were all in uniform. And I don't know how many we had. I think we had 8, but whatever. They were all German uniforms. But the overseer just walked back and forth, and we went to work every day except Sunday. They let us have Sunday off. And if the weather got a little bit warmer, and we began on Sunday, I'd take off the bottom of my long johns and wash them, and go get back wrapped up in my blanket till they dried. You wash one garment at a time. When we had gone overseas, we spent 3 days on an LST before we could land in France. And I had 2 3-day passes in London living in civilization. But when we got to France, I had never had a bath from December. I would take a part of a bath. I'd do something to keep myself clean, but to get in a shower or bathtub, no. No way. Not available. Of course, in Germany, I hardly could do that in prison camp. Did the best you could. But about the end of the first month that we were chipping bricks, we could tell that they were making progress in rebuilding the plant. We could see pipe and structures and stuff beginning to come up out of the ground, and not long after that, every day, one lone American plane would fly over. They'd have to sound the air raid siren, and our air raid shelter was about a half a mile away. It was a cave, and when the siren went off, the guards just got us all in a pile and started running toward the cave. Well, that plane would fly over and nothing happened, and we'd go back out and start chipping bricks again. The next day, the same thing. Well, we later realized that it was a reconnaissance plane, and he was taking a picture of the factory. And from those pictures, they could determine the progress of the reconstruction. And we kept chipping bricks. And long in early April 45, a trainload of tank cars was backed into a siding at the plant. Well, this was an indication that they had made some of the benzene and needed to ship it out where it could be used. And that night, they bombed the plant to the ground again. Well, we knew there was a air raid somewhere. We lived about 6 miles from the plant. And when we first got there, they had trolley cars that took us to the plant, and then they got bombed out, and then they had horses and wagons that took us. The last week, we'd walk it. And we went out there the morning. As I said, we knew there was an air raid somewhere, but we didn't know where until we got to the plant. Saw it had been bombed completely to the ground again. And the old Walrus met us there, and in perfect English told us that he had understood everything we said. He knew exactly what we talked about to him or to each other. he took it just as an old gentleman should have taken it. And we continually talk about that. We'd look at him and smile and call him the vilest name we could think of, thinking he would know what we were saying. And he knew every word. Well, the next day, it was becoming obvious that the war was in its ending days.
Was there any word, any direct word, was there any way to know, or it was just kind of observation?
What?
Was there any word that got to y'all, or rumors, or y'all were just completely cut off?
Yes.
Okay.
We had one guard who spoke a little English, a young man. I don't know, I think he was younger than I, and I was 20 at the time. He had been horribly wounded on the Russian front. He had a withered arm, but he had been put on guard duty. And he would come in our barracks sometime at night and tell us where the American and the British forces were, where the lines were. He didn't do it regularly, but every now and then he would just go. That's the only contact we had with the outside world. We had nothing. For the last 5 days, we were prisoners. They just walked us out of this school area where we lived and just said, we're going to walk. And the first day we walked 30-something kilometers. The next day we walked 24, I'll say. I have accurate. The Germans let me keep my Episcopal prayer book. I'm a member of the Episcopal Church, and I had a prayer book, and they let me keep it. It became my diary. I have all my notes written in my Episcopal prayer book. But this is where I have accurate figures rather than my guesses that I'm making now. But the third day we didn't walk but about 18 kilometers, and the fourth day they told us we weren't going to walk anywhere. When it began to get dark, wherever they would just find whatever kind of building was big enough for all of us to be put in and locked, and that was our night. Well, the fifth or sixth night, we went out in a rural area. One day on our walking, we walked through the same town twice. We walked through it, made a circle, and came back through the other direction. Walked through the same town twice. They were just keeping us from being in a spot to be liberated. Well, this day, the 13th of April, we were in the country, and there was a barn. And they told the farmer that if they just take it over, we were going to lock us in the barn that night, which they did. And the next morning, our main guard was he was a typical German. He's hateful. He was the only one that would ever threaten to hit you or hit you, anything like that. The others never did. We called him the Dodger. I don't know where he got that name, but he was the Dodger. And the Dodger opened the barn door and said, "You are free. We are taking you to whoever this is." All the guards but he and the young Russian, the boy injured on the Russian front, all the other guards had left. They put on civilian clothes and gone home. Well, we formed on the road and got a piece of a sheet from the house.
Charlie, how many of there were you at this point? About guess how many men how many men were with you at this point?
This is 100.
100.
This is the 100 that stepped forward when they asked for volunteers.
Okay, so still the 100. Okay. You got the sheet.
Got the sheet and a pole and put it up on the pole and formed up in a column on the road and started walking. We didn't know where, what, anything else. But we had walked maybe a mile, maybe a little over. And I wish I knew his name. I did not get his name. But a German tank pulled out of the woods and headed the gun right down toward us. And we started waving and hollering and singing. And this British captain jumped out of the turret of the tank and started down the road toward us. He had his pistol in his hand. He started down the road toward us. They didn't know who we were. And then he realized that we were not enemy. And I guess recognized us as Americans and welcomed us. And we asked him to kill the Dodger and to give the boy injured on the Russian front all the good treatment he could possibly give him, but he'd been helpful to us. And he told us we had to get out of there. They were getting ready to start an attack. And there were 6 or 8 of the 6x6 trucks that had brought gasoline up to him, refueled his tanks, other equipment. And he loaded as many of us on one of those 6x as they could and took us about, I'd say, 28, 30 miles to the town of Hildesheim. Hildesheim had a landing strip, and C-47s were flying in loaded with gasoline, and they'd unload the gasoline. They were in these 5-gallon cans you've seen. And they'd unload the gasoline and put 25 of us on the plane to fly out. Well, we spent the first night there in the hangar on the floor. They didn't have any accommodations for us.
What was
but
it? What
that
was it
we
like
were
getting
free.
back?
That was the first time since January we could be free and do anything we wanted to without asking somebody or
Did
getting
they kill
permission.
the Dodger?
Hmm?
Did they kill the Dodger? Did they kill Dodger?
We don't know,
You
but
don't.
I'm sure they didn't. And I'm sure they didn't give the Russian injured boy any particular good treatment. That didn't make any difference. We spoke our piece.
I want to ask one thing. What about medical care when you were
We didn't have any. 2 or 3 people got sick, and they took them somewhere to a doctor. If you had something, they would take you somewhere. But fortunately, not many things happened to you.
Did you get
I
med-
lost a filling.
Oh.
But it my tooth never ached. I didn't have a toothache. That's the only thing that ever happened to me. I guess I lost the feeling about halfway through my prison time. But on the 14th of April, the British liberated us. And that night we stayed on the floor of the hangar, and then they started putting us in groups of 25. And as a plane would come in, they'd fly out 25. Well, our group broke up. My name was called for some reason. I have no idea why. And I was on the 3rd plane that flew out. I was only one of our group of 18. And I was flown to Oxford, England, to Army Hospital. And we were the first liberated prisoners that had come into that hospital. And I know the Army, this was all guinea pig stuff. They were finding out about prisoners and what had happened to us, what we needed, were we infected with something. We were put in a quarantine area, fenced off area, back in prison again. And when we landed, they gave you a name in the Army. We were RAMPs, R-A-M-P-S, Repatriated American Military Personnel. Well, certainly, that immediately became tramps. We were tramps. But we were the first tramps that had landed in Oxford, and a little part of the town turned out to greet us. And the city officials and some attractive young ladies met the plane and escorted us into the hangar. Well, before we could get there, they had a tent set up, one of these 6x6 pyramidal tents, and they took us to the door and said, "We'll meet you when you come out the other side." Well, that was the DDT tent. We were eaten up with lice. A lot of times at night we'd be awake or something. He's crossing my navel, I'm chasing him. We were just eaten up with lice. And this was a DDT tent, and they just stuck hoses up your breeches, down your breeches, up your arm, down your back, in your hair. You came out, you would look like Casper the Ghost. You was perfectly white. You were covered with DDT. And I have no ill effects from it, but they took it off the market because it's supposed to be bad for somebody. We came out the other side, and the ladies met us and took us in the tent, and they had tea and crumpets. And we sat there for 5 minutes, and the meat wagons came and got us, the ambulances came and got us and took us to the hospital, and the hospital herded us out. It's still cold, but they told us we had to take off all our clothes. They gave us a little bag to put any personal articles we had in. And as soon as you got naked, they gave you a blanket and a bathrobe. But it's still cold in April in England. And before we all got inside, they had poured gasoline on our clothes and burned them. Well, we got inside there, and they asked us what we wanted to eat. I told them I wanted a steak and eggs, and they told me that I could have it and that I could have a shower. Well, when I'd taken my clothes off, that was the first time I had been naked, and I had lost 52 pounds. I wasn't anything but skin and bone. I weighed 180 when I was captured, and I weighed 128 at the hospital. But I got in the shower, and I just sat down on the floor and just let it rain on me. And of course, I came out, I was so shriveled up, I looked like a prune. And they brought my steak and eggs. And I got 4 or 5 bites down and vomited every bit of it. And the doctors just laughed. They said, "Now you're going to do what we want to do, aren't you?" And they put cases of baby Gerber food in our ward. You could eat all the Gerbers you wanted to. But for about 8 days, that's all we had. And a lot of that's not bad if you put a little salt on it. I don't see how babies eat it, but well, when I got home a few weeks later, there again I'd have to refer to my prayer book.
Were you home at
I
least
had
by the end
gained
of the
30
war?
pounds.
Were you home before the war ended?
No.
Okay.
No, I stayed in Oxford at the hospital until the 4th of May. And then the Army taking over hotels, and we were put in hotels. And every day we had to check the bulletin board in the morning. If your name was on the bulletin board that morning, you had to be ready to ship out at 6 o'clock the next morning. Well, I picked up a friend, a buddy, at the hospital. You always had to have one buddy, at least. Louis Webster from Indianapolis. And incidentally, I called about 6 months ago, and his wife said he wouldn't recognize me. He'd had Alzheimer's, and she wouldn't put him on the phone. Anyhow, he and I went to the picture show on the 7th of May. And somebody in the middle of the afternoon stuck their head in the back of the pit theater and said the war's over. Well, of course, we jumped up. I had wanted a German pistol, and I had one, but I didn't have any money. I hadn't been paid since January, and I wasn't drawing but $10 a month. I was sending everything else home. The little bit I had, over $10, he couldn't spend it. Mother and Dad put it in the bank for me every month, and I bought the engagement ring for the girl I married with it. I took my pistol to an Air Corps bar where a bunch of the hot pilots hung out, and just laid it on the counter, and I said, I want to sell this. And people asked me how much, and I said, y'all just start bidding, and got up to $130, and I took it. And I certainly ought not to tell you this, but it is in my other tape. I spent $60 on whiskey and had a celebration on VE Day. All my friends and I had a celebration on VE Day. And you never can experience anything like that, and you can't. There's no way you can see it. Those people had been in a war for 5 years, and just one day it was over. It was something. The worst thing I ever did in my life. People were just walking around. They had scraped the black paint off of the street lights. You could take black paint off of the headlights of your car. You didn't have to have a flashlight to walk around. And thousands of people were just parading all over around London. And I was sitting on the curb just watching them, 3 or 4 of my buddies and I. And an elderly couple walked by, dressed beautifully in nice clothes. And I walked over, they were just crying their eyes out. And I walked over and stopped and introduced myself and said, at night of so much why are you crying? We lost our 5 sons in this war. That brought a great deal home to me. I don't know why I asked that question. We lost our 5 sons in this war. Well, on the 9th of May, my name was on the bulletin board, and I shipped out of England on a boat coming home. Took us 21 days to go across the ocean. Took us 4 days to come back. We were in the largest convoy that ever crossed the ocean up to that time. And the convoy can move only as fast as the slowest vessel. And it took us 21 days. And that's another story, but doesn't have anything to do with PW. I was, we landed in Boston, and they made up a train that I don't know how many coaches it had on it to start with, but from Boston all the way to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Any time the train went through a town where an army post was nearby or in the town, they had put the people on the coaches, cars, for that location. And people in New York, for instance, wherever we stopped in New York, they cut off that car. New Jersey, West Virginia, whatever it was, all the way down. Well, we got to Atlanta, Georgia, there wasn't but 2 coaches left. So that was the end of the troop train. They tacked us on the back of a regular passenger train. And the 2 camps after we left Atlanta were Fort McClellan, Alabama, and Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And my family had a friend. I had called from Boston and told them I was in the country. That's the first time I had talked to them. And I had written an email letter when I got to the hospital. And I didn't know it till I got home, but I had been missing in action. They did not know I was a prisoner until they got the letter that I wrote from the hospital. And I was missing in action for a little over 3 months. But this friend with the railroad kept checking, and he found a train leaving Atlanta with 2 coaches, military coaches on it. Called Mother Dad, and when we pulled into Meridian, Mississippi, which was my hometown, I looked out the coach, and my mother and dad and sister were in the depot. And the captain was in charge of the train, and I started out the door, and he told me I couldn't go out, couldn't get off of the train, and I just told him, I said, "I'm sorry, Captain, this is my mother and my father and my sister, and I'm going to see them."
Let me stop you right there. We got out of tape.
That's enough.